Hey, how's it going? It's Sam Frost here, back with some more digital marketing advice. Now, in today's short video, I'm going to answer a question I've seen asked a few times online with respect to website traffic, and that's whether too much website traffic can actually crash a website. And the answer to that is yes, but realistically for most businesses, it's not something you're going to have to worry about too much. However, it definitely can happen, and if you're in a business where there's I guess a sort of risk of a massive flood of traffic, although to be honest it can be hard to predict this, that's where you might have to look at how your website is hosted and what the sort of bandwidth and capacity of your hosting is in order to make sure that you're kind of not at risk of your website crashing at a level of peak demand. Now, the reason I know this is very much first-hand experience for me. My brother and I used to run a website about 3D printers, and way back in the day, we had pretty steady, consistent traffic to this website. It was growing quite nicely, but my brother actually wrote an article that got featured on the homepage of BBC. I can't remember exactly if it was BBC UK or one of their international divisions, but whatever it was a whole flood of traffic, like thousands and thousands of visitors within the space of a few minutes of that article going live, linking through to us, wound up flooding onto the site. And basically what happened is the server crashed. We exceeded our sort of traffic bandwidth quota that we had with the pretty basic hosting we were using at the time, and the website went down, and then pretty much by the time we were able to get it back live again, the momentum had passed because that article was no longer the headline news on BBC at the time. It was something to do with 3D printed housing, which was very topical at that point in time. And so for us it was pretty disappointing because we missed out on a whole lot of traffic from this article that was hosted on BBC. We missed out on ad clicks and revenue and all sorts of things, but it was a good learning experience to look at hosting for other projects we run, so make sure we've got good hosting. Realistically, most small to medium businesses, especially if you're a business in, say, a fairly sort of consistent industry where you're not driving huge swings of traffic through social media or anything, it's unlikely you're going to crash your hosting. If you're using something like Shopify or Squarespace or so on, where you're sort of paying all in one a subscription for the platform and the hosting, it's very rare, at least in my experience, that too much traffic will crash one of these sites, but it possibly could happen. So if you think you're about to drive a massive flood of traffic for some reason, it might be worth checking in. Typically speaking, where this is more of an issue is on WordPress websites or other sort of independently hosted sites, but WordPress is pretty common here. So you've got your site that's been built and you've got it hosted, and depending on how your site's been built and who's hosting it, there's levels to website hosting. So it might be that you've hosted it yourself, or you've gone and found a host and you've tried to save a few dollars by buying the cheapest possible shared hosting, where you've actually got a pretty stingy traffic bandwidth quota and storage quota and so on, and then you get a big flood of traffic, and it's exactly what happened to my brother and I, and we learned the hard way. On the other hand, you might have a more sort of premium hosting service that can really handle a big volume spike of traffic. So without knowing specifics of your website and your hosting setup and everything, it's difficult for me to give an accurate answer here. But for sure, too much traffic can crash a website. That's why when you go out and say pay for a website developer to build you a site, it's worth actually talking to them and saying, look, what sort of hosting do you use? Do you host your own client sites internally? I've seen that done where, web development companies, they run their own web hosting, for example, and sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad, because sometimes the web hosting is not as good as it could be, or oftentimes they're reselling other businesses' hosting, so they're buying hosting in bulk, in effect, and reselling it to you as their client and clipping the ticket on the way. But are you getting hosting that's got generous bandwidth allowance? What would happen if suddenly you had an article go viral on Facebook that's linking back to your site and you got a flood of, thousands or tens of thousands of visitors? Would your site hosting be able to deal with that? And if there is a problem, what's the process for resolving it? For example, if you're working with a hosting provider who is your website developer or website agency, do they have a system in place where if a client site goes down, they can very quickly get it back up and give some additional bandwidth and maybe charge you a bit of a premium for that extra bandwidth? And if they do charge you a premium, what's the cost going to be? So all these questions you need to kind of consider. As I said, for most businesses, this is something that's unlikely to happen, but it does happen from time to time, and you need to be aware of it, especially if you're looking at any kind of business model where you're going to be trying to generate sort of viral traffic through social media, for example, because sometimes you might get pretty consistent traffic and then you'll have a big spike. I've seen it happen with websites that I run as a sort of side project, for example, where we get pretty consistent traffic through organic search, but then I'll go and share an article from the website to a Facebook page associated with that site. Sometimes I get a bit of traffic, and other times it will go gangbusters, and you wind up with 10, 15,000 visits all in one go. Now, typically speaking, that's fine for the hosting that I'm using, because I'm using good quality hosting now. I've learned the hard way. But if you were on a really basic, cheap host trying to save a few dollars, that might be actually enough to tip your site over and take it down. So can too much traffic crash a site? Yes, it can. Most businesses are probably not going to encounter this problem, but if you think it's a risk, or if you're not sure where those kind of cutoff points are or what you need to be aware of, talk to your website host, talk to your website provider if you're using something like Shopify or Squarespace. Jump on the live chat, find out what the deal is. Although, as I said, those kind of platforms are generally not so much of a risk. It's more of a risk if you're paying for hosting for something like a WordPress site that's been built by a website developer. How are they hosting it, and what are their systems to deal with sites that do go down from excessive demand? So hopefully you found that helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.